What's up, y'all? It's CousinChet. I'm here with Dill again. Good to see you, bro. How's that hand, by the way?
It's pretty good.
Looks
it's just
good.
all lumpy.
Can you shake yet?
Yeah.
Like if somebody gives you a good squeeze, does it hurt? I didn't give you a good squeeze.
They did that whole like.
God damn, my hand just froze, bro. Your hands are so cold.
Everybody always says that.
Like, Mr. Freeze just shook my hand.
I was student teaching once, and this one girl, I don't know why, but for the rest of the semester, it was just her thing. She'd always be like, "Morning, Mr. Vampire."
Well, that's got to make you feel good.
They good.
Good morning, Mr. Vampire. That kids are great, aren't they? Like, really.
Yeah.
What age group were we talking about?
They were 6th graders.
So like 11, 12, maybe 13. Right before we pushed the record button, I was kind of saying, like, here's 2 topics that I think we could discuss. And one thing that we wanted to do is take a week, just take a break from all the Elon Twitter, all the political, emotional rah that I know I've been feeling in the last week on Twitter as a new Twitter user.
A problem I've noticed is Twitter is kind of a stimulant.
Yeah, it kind of is, right? It's a little bit of a muse.
God knows I have problems with stimulants.
Yeah. It's actually prompted me to, I've written a couple little, how many characters do you get?
150, thereabout.
I thought it was like I read one, someone said 280. I think it might be 180. Regardless, I've written a couple little, like, I've been motivated to write a little bit, to write some little of my little stream of consciousness.
Freestyles.
Yeah, freestyles, stream of consciousness poetry. So you can find that Twitter at CousinChet. All your support is appreciated as always. And Dylan and I wanted to ask y'all for Christmas, the 40 or so people that are going to probably watch this. We've had pretty steady for the last couple of weeks, about 40-ish.
That's nice.
Yeah. So thank you to all 40 of you. Thank you to everybody that watches, that clicks on it. For Christmas, we just ask for likes, shares, subscribes, anything like that. Anything to support us, to help us kind of build our podcast and to get a larger audience. That right now is the best Christmas gift that you could give us. So some algo love is much needed. So with that being said, this week I watched some John Leguizamo, some of his what I would kind of consider stand-up comedy, but apparently, like, I didn't realize this, but he's done some Broadway play type one-man shows. Did you know that? Hold on, first of all, do you know who John Leguizamo is?
Not whatsoever.
You don't know who John Leguizamo is?
I don't think so.
Yeah, he's more of like my time, really, in a way. So the little...
It kind of sounds to me like Supernatural, where it's like technically Supernatural's a rapper.
No.
But it's like...
He's actually an actor. So he was in, like, I want to say he was in Donnie Brasco with Al Pacino. He did a movie about some cross-dressers, transgenders, with Patrick Swayze and Wesley Snipes back in the day.
This guy is of your time.
Yeah. This is definitely, like, he was pretty more popular as a younger person in like the 90s kind of era. And then most people would recognize his voice as from Ice Age. I'm trying to remember the name of his character right now, and I was going to actually tag him in this, and I'm not going to do it now because I'm...
Is he a fucking sloth?
He's from this, and he talks like this, and a little bit like... Yeah, that's John Leguizamo, yeah. Sid, yeah, I think that's Sid, right? So anyway, he had not been a super... I mean, I was aware of him because he was a name as I was growing up. He's Latin, and, you know, so for me, there's a little bit, you know, like, you know, that movie he does with Wesley and Patrick Swayze, right? He's the Latin input into that, right? Into this kind of diversity, right? I guess they needed a Ford. They really kind of shut out the Asians there. That's kind of bad. But anyway,
they got all the 80s kung fu movies.
the thing that I noticed about his one-man shows, the ones that I saw, they're very, very intimate. He really talks about himself and his experience.
He's a professional storyteller.
He is a good storyteller, and so there are two major things that I related to him on. One is he's a depressive. If I listening to his shit, I'd say that he has dealt with depression most of his life. I think he, in some ways, describes it as not liking himself. And in other ways, it's just he's never happy. Like it's never good enough. You know, he shared that at times, even at the heights of his fame and the heights of his money, that he just wasn't happy. Well, I recognize that as a person that suffers from depression as depression. And so I related to that. And I related to, because in one of them, he does this thing. He's like, you know, I got depressed. And you know what happens when I get depressed. And he kind of does this over and over as he's telling his story, right? So that the crowd kind of gets to know that, you know, he can't sleep. He's going to drink. He drinks too much coffee. He drinks too much alcohol. Then he can't sleep. And then he ends up masturbating himself to death. And then he starts to write, right? And it's through these writings, like basically what happens is, these good things happen. It's not good enough for him. He gets depressed. And that sends him into this death spiral. And then he comes out writing, right? Mm-hmm. And then we get to see the finished product because he's kind of just bearing his soul, really. And I really respected that.
I was watching, I don't remember what the video was, but somebody breaking down. I was watching a YouTube video and this guy was making this case of like the greatest works of literature, the greatest artwork pieces, you know, the greatest sculptures Michelangelo ever made. Just, he was given this rap sheet of examples of really good art. Seems like it almost always stems from depressed genius. Like, there's always some sort of, like, there is a genuine sort of suffering that the greatest works of art are made of. And it's like, that's a very different, that's a different reality to live in than what, at least I grew up kind of hearing in school, which is, whether you can or you can't, whether you tell yourself you can or you can't, you're usually right. Like, shoot for the stars. Like, just this kind of like platitude. Yep, just put in the time, put in the work. Like, you can just kind of slowly like get your way to being an artist, or you can gradually get that law degree. And it's like, I don't know. The older I get, the more it just feels like life's a battle. Like, life's a fight one way or another.
I agree.
And it's like, yeah, it's if you can pit yourself against the suffering you're gonna induce upon yourself, that seems like that's.
And you know, I think that leads to something that really I had known before, but John Leguizamo, excuse me if I'm saying your name wrong. What I recognized in listening to him is that, one, he's really blessed that he had the avenue to make money off of his depression in a way. And that he had that ability to, you know, like in one of them, he says, like, you guys this is like therapy to me. You know, I should be paying you guys. He's like, but I won't. You know, but I think that to go to something else you said, I do think that there can be a fine line between genius and crazy, and I think that it's a really for some people it's a really tight rope to walk on. The real thing that I wanted to say in response to you was that it once again gives me another example that the people would tell me like, oh, if you would just, get your life together, you wouldn't be depressed. If you would just do this, you wouldn't be depressed. If I just had this, I wouldn't be depressed. If I just had a boat, I wouldn't be depressed. If I just had a car, if I just had a house, career, if I was known, if I was this, if I could write a script, if I could write a book, you know what I mean? And the reality is depression doesn't give a shit about any of that.
Mm-hmm.
My rich uncle, the most successful man in my family, kind of known tribe to me, committed suicide, and so that told me like money doesn't buy you a way out of depression. Depression is a real thing, and some of us suffer very intensely, and it's not like a thing that goes away. It's just like a thing that's constantly present. It's like this: I'm not good enough. The world's not good enough. I don't know what it is for everybody else. And sometimes I don't even know what it is for me.
Seems like the real key is figuring out how to own your own suffering. Like, do you get to dictate, okay, this is where I suffer. This is where I put the time in. This is where I do the push-ups.
And I think that it leads to acceptance. Like in part of the things that I watched, he kind of goes back home and he talks to his dad, and then he steps outside and he's like, oh, that's where I had my first kiss, or that's where I used to play stickball, or that's where I did this, or that's where I did that. And he's like, damn, this wasn't so bad after all. And for a depressive person, I could relate to that, right? I can relate to going back and going, wow, there were some good memories. Why am I so sad about it? Why do I hold such a negative view on it? And, what you said, life is suffering. No, you said life is what?
It's about
it's a battle.
The suffering.
But so that's sticks out to me is that the first tenet of Buddhism is life is dukkha. They use the word dukkha, which is a Sanskrit word that we translate into suffering. But in many ways, that's what you said. Mm-hmm. Life is a struggle, right? I think it's funny that dukkha sounds like shit, like dookie, right? So life is shit, right? In some of my more negative nihilistic moments, right, I definitely related like life is shit, bro. Like this is bullshit. But anyway, and from what I understand, the major message of the Buddha is that if you accept that fact, if you accept the fact that we're all going to suffer, we're all going to get sick, we're all going to get old, we're all going to die. I don't care if you're Donald Trump pooping in golden toilets, you're going to have bad days. You're going to have struggles, And I personally think for the highly intelligent, quote unquote, genius, creative types, that there's a mental battle that's just as much of the suffering as the physical battle.
It's almost like, I don't know, there's almost some sort of implicit rebelliousness to it, like to the act of being creative. It's like, you know what, life is so shit, fuck it, fuck everybody else, fuck me, fuck you, like I'm gonna make something beautiful.
Yeah,
I'm gonna leave something that was remarkable.
I do want to push back that I think that some people are very creative in another state of mind. That some people's muse comes more when they're happy, when they're satiated. You know what I mean? I think that there are plenty of people that create art out of a joy. That may not be me. That may not be Mr. Leguizamo.
Who's that though? See what I mean?
You just asked me too quick, man. I mean, Bob Ross. Thank you very much.
Bob Ross.
Hell yeah, I'm using Bob Ross. That big Afro Alaska looking mug. Yeah. Bob Ross. He created out of joy. You don't think so? I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I think Bob Ross probably many, many days of depression. I would highly... Yeah. I would be surprised to find out that man was always like just happy and chipper, and a little tree lives here and a little birdie flies over here, But yeah, Bob Ross, I think he created out of joy. Wasn't his show called The Joy of Painting?
Do you think you get
With
Bob
Bob
Ross without Vietnam though? See what I mean? Somebody's got to pay the piper.
We all got to pay the piper, bro. That's
Even Bob.
That's what you get. Like, I'm sorry, man, but I mean, like, I'm not sorry. Like, if I look at the way I look at things, like, I don't know if there's something after this. I don't know if there's consciousness after this. I don't know if there's my individual consciousness after this.
Well,
And to me, hold on real quick. To me, this right here, having this life, might be what all the souls want, is just to experience life. You know, and we're sitting here like, oh, this life sucks, and I want to go to heaven because it's supposed to be good there. But what if this is the paradise that we're promised? What if after this, there's no sensation of life? There's no sensation of experience. You know, this is where spirit gets to experience in some ways. You understand what I'm saying? And so, like,
what's the life algorithm look like behind the curtain?
the life algorithm,
Yeah, is it really that much more exciting than
the nothing.
The Wizard of Oz? Is it? Yeah. I'm trying to. I'm kind of agreeing with you in a way where it's like once you kind of step behind the curtain, that's it.
Once you pull back the painted veil.
Yeah, once your heart stops beating, you're somewhere. You don't know where.
Can I see your phone? I want to look something up.
Yeah, sure.
I'm sorry to interrupt your thought, bro.
And actually, I was going down a really blurry rabbit hole, but
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole because I want to look up William Blake. Where's my
William Blake? That's a good one.
And I think it's called The Painted Veil by William Blake. And I don't think it's that long of a poem. Oh, it says it was a novel. Hold on.
Nobody fucking talks about William Blake enough.
I thought he had a poem that started off, "Lift not the painted veil," or something to that effect.
Well, that's kind of what I was thinking. I was thinking of The Wizard of Oz, and it's like that moment where you pull back the curtain and you see the man behind the wizard.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like,
honestly, that's what I know. We said we were going to do this, but I feel like that's what Elon's been doing like the whole last week. He just pulled back the curtain, and here I am, the scared lion, and I don't know what you are, the Tin Man or the Scarecrow. You be whatever you want to be, Toto. But like, you know what I mean? Like, he's giving us a view. You know what I mean? And it's not just me and you. It's like all of us. Like anybody that's been on Twitter. You know.
You know, William Blake's a pretty good example of somebody who just absolutely, to your point, just thrived, just prospered in the creative process.
Tell me more.
I mean, to the best of my recollections, he was basically some eccentric artisan of sorts from whenever, 1600s. And he's this Englishman from the 16th, 17th century. And if I recall properly, then he basically was maybe in his 20s, 30s, thereabouts. And he had this enormous crisis of faith. And I think that's the time period where he had this sort of hallucinatory experience that he memorialized with The Flea, which was a painting he did, or an engraving, whatever it was. But he made this little portrait called The Flea, and it's just this tiny. he had this like sort of border hallucinatory religious experience where he noticed this flea on his shoulder, and the flea, like, all at once he just kind of had this projection of this flea, seeing it for what it was up close, and what he saw was a tiny little man. It was like this tiny bestial looking man whispering secrets about the world into his ear and explaining, yeah, that's where all fleas come from. We are the souls that languished are. Where the flea, basically explaining, that's where fleas come from, is fleas are the languished. We are the souls of men who languished their potential. And then by the time it was our time, that was all that there was left behind the curtain, was just the lowest, basest animal instincts. Where's the next drop of blood for me to suck dry? And it's something to do with that painting, like that was at the tail end of this enormous crisis of faith he had. And to the best of my memory, that was kind of his Vietnam experience. That was kind of Bob Ross crossing the Pacific for the last time. But I don't know, one way or another, like, I feel like that's a useful metric, and it's not even all that cynical or pessimistic to look at it as, yep, life is suffering. Life is like...
Life is hard.
Yeah.
And life has been hard for, I'd say, the majority of people that have ever walked this planet. I mean, I don't know who's had life easy. I think it's easy to look from the outside to an inside and say, oh, their life looks easy, you know?
Well, you were mentioning Buddhism and kind of this sort of mortal veil that everybody lives in and everybody has to endure through.
Samsara, I think, is what they call it in Buddhism.
I've been thinking a lot about that dharmic wheel over the last couple of years. Like, have you ever heard of a book called The Fourth Turning? It's basically, there's a couple collegiate statisticians, or one of them might have been some sort of economist. But there were a couple guys who got together and came up with this idea for a book. How about we just examine the pure numbers, like the pure stats of the last 100 years of civilization, and see if we can find a pattern that seems to play out. So they got together and they start brainstorming. They're just absorbing all of this. They're absorbing the broadest and most specific cultural information that they can of Western civilization, and they came to this conclusion that for the last 200 or 300 years, there's this pattern that tends to play out in Western civilization. And they get real specific with it, but I think it was written back in like the mid-90s, early 90s, but basically the pattern is, it's kind of something akin to that dharmic wheel of you have,
cycles.
Yeah, you have these eras or these cycles.
Right.
And there's always this one part in Eastern philosophy, in Hindu and Buddhist thought, there's always this end of the cycle. There's this tail end of the cycle called Kali Yuga.
Kali Yuga?
Yeah. And the Kali Yuga is essentially the Ragnarok end of the cycle. It's sort of the dissolution, it's entropy catching up with the wheel.
It's the end of the cycles.
Yeah, and it's a Ragnarok, apocalyptic scenario where the civilization or the eras or the humanity that's kind of imbibing in this system reaches its point of total entropy, and then you start to see chaos seep in, and that's where the goddess Kali is the destructive, you know, the goddess of destruction. That's her era. That's where the spirit of Kali is most pronounced.
But doesn't see that destruction just bring another form of creation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the
Because it's not the true. There's no real end to the cycles.
yeah.
I mean, it's my understanding.
Well, and that's kind of what I'm thinking of when I'm. That's kind of what I'm thinking of when I'm thinking of. Well, we've been in this long stride for a while where it is kind of just common sense that it's like you don't get to just create, like you suffer for your creations. You have to look you dive headlong into life looking at it as a trade-off. And the thing is I kind of suspect that most people haven't lived lives imbibing in this overwhelming sense of suffering and depression and nihilism. I suspect that most people throughout time haven't lived so cynically. I think the game's been changed, if that makes any sense. I don't know.
I mean, when we talk about time, I want to go back, we don't have to go back like 250 years, right? When most people on this planet they were going to wonder, what am I eating? Am I going to make it through winter? You know what I mean? How am I going to heat my house? Or we got to chop wood.
You think that's
we got to chop wood, carry water. You know what I'm saying?
You think that's been most of human history, though?
What's that?
That sort of endless survivalist struggle.
Yeah. I mean, we've been around for billions. How long have we been around? I can't keep looking stuff up and ignoring it. So
I would argue. I would argue probably in the ballpark of 1 million years, at least.
We'll have to look that up. But even if that's the case, because I think it may be longer. But even if that's the case, and it depends on what we consider human, right? Are we talking about Neanderthals? Because I'm going to go back to them because those are still our ancestors.
Well, it depends on what you consider history
and
what you consider myth.
But what I see around the world, I mean, we still have people living in tribal situations like that. We still have people living hunter-gatherer lifestyles. We still have people that wonder, what am I going to eat tomorrow? You know what I mean? That's suffering, dude. You think crackheads are bad? Wait till somebody's starving, bro. Like that's.
But we see all that now.
But do we? Do we think about the people in the Philippines that during COVID shutdowns had nothing to eat but rice, if they were lucky, every day for every meal? And we think people aren't suffering. Do we think about the people in East Africa who are just glad that they had enough ugali to give them a couple meals for the day?
I think the ignorance is deliberate now. I think there's a willful turning away from it, but for most of human history, it's like, hey, once we got a grasp on our problems, once the town or the tribe or the clan, once we've kind of carved out a niche for ourselves.
Yeah, but then there's still more. There's other suffering, but I still think, I agree with you. The people that lived in towns and things like that, as we've created civilization, right? That's one thing that civilization. But there's still a lot of people in those cities that are struggling to figure out how they're going to make ends meet and how they're going to eat. Like, go to any major city in the United States right now.
Yeah, well, and I'm being kind of circular because I'm thinking about the Dharmic wheel, no pun intended.
Mm-hmm.
But
so I want to go back to so it was not William Blake who wrote the poem that I'm thinking about. It was actually Hold on. It says published by Mrs. Shelley.
Mary Shelley?
Yeah. But I thought before I clicked on it. So one of the Shelleys. It's published by Mary Shelley, Mrs. Shelley. But I think it's attributed to actually Percy Shelley, who was her husband. For those of you who don't know, Mrs. Shelley is the woman who wrote Frankenstein, one of the best books ever written. One of my favorite stories.
Definitely.
It's just awesome.
The modern Prometheus.
Yeah. Yep. Lift not the painted veil which those who live call life. Through unreal shapes be pictures there, and it but mimic all we would believe with colors idly spread. Behind lurk fear and hope, twin destinies, who never weave their shadows over the chasm, sightless and clear and drear. Excuse me. First time reading, I apologize, everyone. I knew who one had lifted it, he saw it, for his lost heart was tender, things to love, but found them not, alas, nor was there aught the world contains, the which he could approve. Through the unheeding many he did move, a splendor among shadows, a bright blot upon the gloomy scene, a spirit that strove for truth, and like the preacher found it not. Okay, now that I've read that one time, I'm definitely reading that again because there's a rhythm that I've got to find with it, but this is a very impactful.
You can hear the vestiges of the lady who writes the most profound popular novel about the death of
this is her husband. Sorry, that she published it, but she published it, I guess.
There's a theme though that ties in with Frankenstein one way or another. Maybe that was kind of just a theme of their marriage. Was this?
Well, and I think that was. I think that they were realizing it, right? They're realizing it. This idea that.
Well, they were romantics.
Yes.
So they were looking at the Industrial Revolution, and they were looking at this urbanization of the world, thinking there's something we're losing here. They're thinking that's what Frankenstein is he's a man made purely out of just the material substance of a human. And even a human being created strictly out of this materialist paradigm, the purely material man has almost nothing but suffering. Like that's all there is to his life. And that's kind of what I hear in that poem is, yeah, there's something you go to the pastor because you want him. It's like the pastor's not going to give you the answers. Pastor shouldn't give you the answers. Pastor's just there to kind of light a fire that gets you to start searching.
Let me read this again.
Like the pastor, there's no guarantee for him either. He doesn't get the answers. There's just the road. I don't know.
Let me read this again. Lift not the painted veil which those who live call life. Through unreal shapes be pictured there, and it but mimic all we would believe with colors idly spread. Behind lurk fear and hope, twin destinies, who never weave their shadows over the chasm, sightless and drear. I knew one who had lifted it. He sought for his lost heart was tender. Things to love, but found them not, alas. Nor was there aught the world contains, the which he could approve. Through the unheeding many he did move, a splendor among shadows, a bright blot upon the gloomy scene, a spirit that strove for truth, and like the preacher, found it not. To me, there's what this is like. There's almost a recognition of the blissful ignorance of not lifting the veil. And the struggle of lifting the veil, according to this, I think, is that for those people that are seeking truth, it's almost like it just adds to the struggle. It's like it's not. It's almost like it's saying it's not humanly really capable. It's not part of the human potential to understand the truth.
Like we started off this little convo explicitly avoiding the topic of Twitter and Elon Musk, but to mention,
Let's reference. We can reference it.
Speaking of Ubermenches,
Ubermensch. Yeah, Elon is an Ubermensch.
Nietzsche's Zarathustra. So Nietzsche's version of the higher man, the enlightened man, is a guy who basically walks around explaining. He's basically the only G real enough to just look people in the eye and say, have you ever thought maybe you're just worrying too much about the afterlife? Maybe aiming towards the afterlife is the problem. Maybe the priests you shouldn't listen to are the ones turning you away from your here and now problems and the ones telling you to worry about an impossibly distant future.
I don't know much about Nietzsche, so my idea, I think of Ubermensch, I just think of Superman, like Superman.
Well, you know who Andrew Tate is, right?
Yeah, it's Top G.
Yeah.
Hustlers University.
Top G.
I got no disrespect for Andrew Tate. I kind of find him funny. I have a lot of respect for him because of his canceled status and his willingness to just say, you know what, I'm a man and this is me and this is what I'm doing. And I think there's a lot of things he says that are actually like worthy. So anyway,
he's kind of the only example of somebody trollish enough to just articulate
It's funny that his masculinity is considered trolling, but really all he's doing is exhibiting a masculinity.
I think he's just wearing it on his sleeve. He's like, these are the masculine feelings.
He's definitely saying this isn't toxic masculinity. This is what masculinity looks like at this end of the spectrum, right?
Since everyone wants to circle jerk about their feelings, here you go. This is how I feel.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if women get to define what it is to be a woman, why can't he define what it is to be a man? Sorry, I don't really want to get on that tangent.
But I bring that up because I'm not subscribed to Hustler University. I'm really not that interested in the wisdom, the secrets, the esoterica of Hustler University. There's a profound shallowness to it, though. And I think the profound shallowness to it is it's sort of like this trumpet call to... There's something about it that I think is really necessary right now, which is romanticizing just the here and now. Romanticizing... Yeah, dude, I got 8 cars in the shop right now being constructed from the ground up, and you know what? Makes me feel good. Makes me happy to know that I got all the fucking Lambos.
It's definitely one way of looking at how to deal with the suffering of life, right?
Well, and the thing is
It's kind of like I'm gonna be a man, and it just rolls off my back, and I just tough it out, like.
Tate threw me for a loop at first because I wasn't sure where like the authenticity met
The troll.
yeah. And then I found out he was a Muslim.
Hmm.
And then it kind of made sense. Then it kind of made sense because it was like, okay, he's basically kind of taken I think Mike Tyson is a much more profound, and in some ways I kind of feel like Mike Tyson is kind of the paragon example of Tate's personal philosophy. But I remember listening to Tyson on Rogan explain how like his whole upbringing was just an ongoing education and conquest. Who was Alexander the Great? Who was Chinggis Khan?
Mm-hmm.
Like, who was Attila the Hun? Like, what did all these men who completely grabbed who grabbed with an iron fist as much of the planet, that owned as much of the world as a single human being can fathom? What did all these guys have in common? And it's like Mike Tyson, that sort of path of the path of the conqueror that he took as a boxer. I think if I remember right, he explains this upbringing he had, and then it all kind of feeds into the time that it all boils up to the moment where he decided to smoke something somebody pulled out of a toad. And it was like suddenly the veil, he got to see behind the veil for the first time, and it was like the second he got swept back out from the veil, he was like, give me some more, I'm going back in. What does all this mean? And it's like, this is a term that's been abused really harshly over the last 2,000 years. But there's a certain Gnostic wisdom that I feel has been kind of exercised by the church, and it's been excised from kind of the common sense perspective of that is kind of what life's about. Is it like almost like there's a certain indulgence, there's a certain degree of experience, there's a certain amount of weeping and gnashing of teeth and intoxication and inebriation, there's a certain amount of just stimuli that you have to go through before you'll reach that point where, yeah, it's time to look behind the veil. It's time to see how the gears are turning. And there's something implicit in, because Mike Tyson is incidentally also a Muslim. I'm not a Muslim either, but there's something important to incorporate from it. There's an important lesson, I think, that's baked into the nature of Islam. This is coming from somebody who hasn't, like, I haven't even really read the Quran, but it's like just listening to the. I've spent a fair amount of time though thinking and listening to Muslim thinkers and trying to hear, before I even have read the Quran, like I've wanted to hear, okay, what does the Muslim perspective sound like? And that is one thing that they all have in common. That's the theme of Islam in a lot of ways is, yeah, no, this life is a conquest. This life is about taking ownership of the suffering and expecting to squeeze the juice out of the lemon. There's this expectation of squeeze all the juice out of, the lemon that is life.
But I think that part of what you're describing is that people like Andrew Tate, Genghis Khan, Alexander, Mike Tyson represent the masculine energy of humanity. And that one of our responses to
Yes.
the suffering of life is to fight back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? One of the responses is to see life as an enemy, as something to be conquered, as something that it's a challenge, right? The challenge can be another word for suffering. Yeah. And say I see it as a challenge, you know. And what is the challenge? Well, the challenge is whatever they decide the challenge is and how they're going to approach it, right? Genghis Khan sees the challenge and says, I'm going to take over the world. I don't know what his ideology was and what his overall end goal was. Like, what does that benefit all the people that are under your Khanate, you know? The same with Alexander, you know? Alexander, like, does he have a purpose other than saying, I'm just going to conquer some shit? And then once it's done, he's dead. Like, what a destiny, right? But so yeah, so you know there's a couple ways to go about it, right? You could be that very masculine person, or you could be kind of the Buddhist, which isn't fighting it. Buddhism, in my interpretation, is not fighting it. The Buddhism says, you know what, you can accept suffering. Oh my gosh, here, pull this up for me, because I'm gonna pull up the Four Noble Truths. Because there's another, Buddhism offers a different way, a very peaceful way at that confrontation. What are the Four Noble Truths according to non-religions?
Well, and I bring up the Kali Yuga and these sorts of late stages of Western civilization because.
But it's not just Western, the
no.
Buddhism sees that these cycles are happening for.
Yeah, no, it's the human condition.
Yeah, okay.
But in some ways, kind of the critical Western examination of its own patterns of behavior, and this Buddhist Hindu concept of dharma and the dharmic wheel. They're really just expressions of the same human condition in a lot of ways. At least that's how it seems to me. But maybe there's just periods, maybe there's just eras where it's like, yeah, that is kind of what we're left to work with. That is the game. You're round one coming up.
Yeah, here's something to consider, man. Like, how lucky are we to be alive? You know how many babies don't make it? How many babies get aborted? How many babies are miscarried? How many babies don't make it past birth? In 100, 200, 300 years ago, people might have 10 kids and only 3 of them survive past the age of 18. I made that statistic up, but I'm doing it to make a point. And so, when you have that, consider being a woman and you have 10 kids and like 7 of them are dead before you're 40. Now 40 at that time was probably an older age, but still, like, the suffering that a woman had to, I can't even imagine giving birth or having a miscarriage or what the emotional, physical toll of that would be. So, the Four Noble Truths. 1, this says the truth of suffering.
Life is suffering.
The second is the truth of the cause of suffering. The third is the truth of ending suffering. And the fourth is the truth of the path that frees us from suffering. The first noble truth is often translated as life is suffering. That's how I've always read it. The second noble truth teaches that the cause of suffering is greed or desire. See, I've looked at it, greed or desire, and I've heard this before, and it made a lot of sense. Suffering is not getting what you want or getting what you don't want. And I thought that was such a simplistic, like, that's so true, right? Like, think about a little kid, and all I want for Christmas is there such thing as a T-Rex Spider-Man? My 3-year-old nephew asked for that, and I was like, is that even real?
T-Rex.
Spider-Man, T-Rex, Spider-Man. Anyhow, and so, and so what is suffering for him, right? I want to not have to go to bed right now. And mommy and daddy are saying I have to go to bed. I'm suffering, right? Poor me, my mom and dad, he's 3, right? And so...
Well, that's kind of, to me, what another way of, like a way of paraphrasing those 4 truths is, here's the game. Life is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
The suffering is implicit in you. You're projecting suffering everywhere you go. And then the third one is, you don't really know what you want. You don't really know where your desires or your cravings or in other words, you don't know where the suffering comes from because you don't really know what you want.
Well, but in part, what they're saying and what I believe Buddha says is that part of the suffering comes from being attached to things, being attached to an outcome, being attached to a product, being attached to a person, right? Why did I suffer when my father died? Because I was attached to him, right? And I didn't want him to leave because I'm attached to him. And that separation, right, hurts. And it's painful, yeah? And so, but part of the deal for me, and what I believe the Buddha taught me, was just to accept it, right? See, for me, I disagree with the Buddha in that we should just get rid of all attachments. I think we just need to accept that it's going to fucking hurt when it gets taken away, So if I have say I have a car, right? And I love this car. It's my favorite car. It's my dream car. I love driving this car, blah, 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 right? I'm just picking an object. And then I wreck it and it's totaled, Like some people are so attached to their car that that would cause a depressive episode. You know what I mean? Like that would cause some major pain for them. Because they're attached to it, you know what I mean? It's easier to describe when you're talking about attachment to a sentient being like a pet or a person. But we all get attached to things. We get attached to our health, right? How sad are you if you get, if you found out that you had a disease that you were going to have for the rest of your life, right? You're attached to your health, yeah?
Well, and if your dad led an exemplary... If your dad lived life to the fullest, it's like the grieving process is meant to be there. So it's like, I've lost my attachment. That hurts. Like I'm wounded from it. But then that healing, grieving process seems like it's kind of meant to be a process of, okay, well, let's step back from the veil of the suffering and let's see Dad's life for what it is, which is. Dad had a full life. Well, Dad had a story.
You're not talking about my dad, but
well,
but anyway,
that's the thing is.
But but my point is to really get to the attachment and the suffering associated, regardless of what kind of life he had, right? Because I can tell you right now that a person that was adopted that never met their parent is going to have a suffering because there's something in us that has an attachment to our parents. Yeah. Right? Like most of the adopted people I know, they want to know who the real parent is. They want to know why. They want to understand, right? And so there's there's almost an innate attachment to our parents. I find it hard to not consider at least to our mothers, right? Because we spend it. I mean, even if you were given up for adoption, you hung out with her for 9 months. Yeah, you felt her emotions. It's
a lot less metaphorical when it comes to mothers.
And so. So how do you alleviate the suffering? I don't know that I can because I am willing to attach to things and I'm willing to say, you know what, it's worth the suffering, right? When the people, thankfully that there have been veterans in our world who have fought to stand up for the freedoms that our Constitution provides us. That those found, thankfully there were those people that were willing to suffer, right? Because they were attached to this idea of freedom, right? So whether it's Martin Luther King or Thomas Jefferson, right? These people were willing to put themselves out there and are willing to take on the suffering, of whatever the suffering turned out to be, right? They were willing to die for it. That's a high form of suffering, right? right? And so that's where a little bit kind of I understand what he's saying about attachment, but I choose to say, you know what? Okay, I'll deal with some suffering because I want to be attached to my mom. I'm grateful that she's
Yeah.
part of my life,
Yeah.
you know? So anyway,
And embracing.
but part of my grieving for my dad goes, man, I'm really glad that, you know, even though he wasn't around as a kid, I'm glad I got to know him as an adult. I'm glad he was my friend. When he passed away, I'm glad we were friends.
Well, and embracing the attachment in a way is taking ownership of that suffering. It's okay, depression doesn't happen to me. Depression is an implicit aspect of my life. It's one chapter in a bigger story, and I get to decide how that chapter gets written. And it's like I know, like, as much as you may say, as much as there may be to say disparaging your dad, you and he found a very profound connection at the end of his life, and you were able to sort of resurrect that father image. That seems like he kind of stepped out. Maybe not in the. Maybe it wasn't perfect. Maybe it wasn't the best articulation of the father archetype, but it was like there was still something there. There was still a journey.
Well, I only get one dad, and he was my dad, regardless of whether or not he met my expectations or other people's expectations of what a dad is or does. You know, he was the one that donated the sperm that met the egg that made me. There's only one person that does that. You know what I mean? And regardless of the archetype things, like to me in the art, like he was never really a father. You know, I would question whether or not he was a dad. In some ways, yeah, but overall, he was my friend. You know, part of his thing is the same thing that I have, and that is a resistance to growing up, a resistance to accept this world of responsibility, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and that's a whole nother tangent. So what we kind of discussed there is on the so the third noble truth is, as we're talking about attachment, right? Is basically the solution to dukkha is to stop clinging and attaching, right? That's a choice. And then the fourth noble truth is the Buddha spent the last 45 years or so of his life giving sermons on aspects of the Four Noble Truths. The major of these were about the fourth truth, the path, the Eightfold Path. Is it going to give it to me?
It's been a really scatterbrained episode.
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, no more than any of our other conversations that we record and call a podcast.
Yeah, I suppose. Maybe that's just me projecting.
I think I don't think so. I think, you know, we started off with John Leguizamo and depression, right? Where does depression come from? Attachment to what?
Well,
for me, I don't know what it was. Attachment to a life that I wish I had that I didn't have. You know what I mean? What causes my depression? Is it because I grew up poor and in a world where everybody else had stuff, and I always wondered, like, what's wrong with me?
Well, you know, this might seem a little out of left field, but have you heard of this little docu-series that came out? Probably not. It didn't seem like the ripple was that big, but called Ancient Apocalypse.
Yeah, with that guy that goes around to all the old structures and is like, hey, there was a
hey, this fucking temple that's half buried.
There may have been some highly technologicalized people that we aren't recognizing in the course of human history.
Graham Hancock, Randall Carlson, Robert Schoch, Emmanuel Velikovsky, Commons Beaumont. There's all these.
So I don't want to let you go too far off because I want to get back to the Four Noble Truths.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up in 2 minutes or less. But one of the things that I walked away from. I didn't walk away. I graduated, but my graduation from college it kind of felt like escape in a lot of ways, because one of the things that I realized coming out of college was how much information, how much of our education system is oriented around controlling what people don't know, and what people don't know they don't know. I think that shaped as much of our education system as letting people know what they don't know. I'm using a lot of cliches.
Say that for me again, though.
Education is supposed to be a process of finding out what you don't know. You know, what you know. That's not an education. That's just you doing your thing. But an education is finding out, what do I not know, and leaning into that so that I can fill myself up with knowledge. Like, how can I excrete all the gnosis from the world possible? And there is an enormous hole. There is an enormous hole that runs right through the center of academia that is human history, because history has been so finagled and edited and shaped that it's like, it's like I said, it's kind of out of left field, but it's like Graham Hancock's show, like, that's kind of one node, that's one little bead on the scale that kind of pulls me back towards, maybe this isn't just like an era of great collapse. Maybe this isn't just civilization burning itself to the ground. Maybe there is some sort of an awakening happening right now. Or maybe there is a sort of like waking up that everybody's a part of.
My dude, we are in one of the most historic moments in the course of human history. We are experiencing the life-changing dynamics of unlimited information. We are experiencing the invention of the printing press on steroids, bro. We are experiencing the advent of fucking fire right now, bro. Like, humans are changing. We are experiencing evolution, at least on a social scale. And so, you know, do I suffer any more than the pharaohs 10,000 years ago? I don't know if the pharaoh, however long ago the pharaohs were, right? 5,000 years ago? 10,000? Do I suffer more? What did they have that I don't have? I bet you they didn't have no damn strawberries and tomatoes. I don't think they had any tomatoes, because tomatoes come from the mines and the fucking Incas and shit like that there, bud. You know what I mean? Do I suffer more? Hell no, man. All those people that suffered, I don't care if they were kings, queens, pharaohs, slaves, or whatever, they have all brought us up to this point right now. Think of it as we're one organism, man. And it's just a million cells, man. That if my cells come and go and die as I evolve, as I mature, you know what I mean? So, like, to me, that's going to the truth, right? I don't have to suffer so much if I consider myself part of this bigger thing, man. This DNA that's running through me. And it has run through like countless however many people to get to me, so that I had the blessing of experiencing life. So that the soul inside of me got a chance to come here. Right? Like I get it. I can be pessimistic a lot, and I can be very nihilistic at times. But there's part of me that recognizes that as a truth, bro. You know? And that means I got to be thankful to all the races, all the people, all the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, all those people that suffered through life, that fought back, that hunted woolly mammoths, you know, that rode on slave ships, you know, that built pyramids, you know, Think about how many people were slaves that built this world, bro. And it's not just black people or Jewish people. You know, there was the serfs and the peasants of Russia, the peasants of Europe, you know, the lonely guy that was just random and became a sailor and chased Moby Dick. You know what I mean? Like all those people, like they matter, you know, because it took all of us to get kind of where we are. And I want to get that.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I took us down a tangent.
No, tangents are fun. So again, I'm getting this information from learnreligions.com, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, the Eightfold Path is the fourth noble truth, right? Basically, he says that this is like the prescription, yeah, of how to not attach to things. And it says right view or right understanding, insight into the truth of nature or reality. Number 2, right intention, the unselfish desire to realize enlightenment. That's a pretty clean one. Unselfish desire. That's hard for humans. Right speech, using speech compassionately. I mean, you know, I'm going to go with Dr. Jordan Peterson on this and say sometimes calling a motherfucker out is compassion. So I don't know who decides what right language is. I think that means different things for different people, or what compassion is. Right action, using ethical conduct to manifest compassion.
Which also involves calling a motherfucker out.
Calls motherfucker out. To right livelihood, making a living through ethical and non-harmful means. I can respect that. I think that is one of the things that Genghis Khan and Alexander, all these murderous, fucking warmongering people that like, I want to conquer the world because that'll bring peace, you know, to make it in their image. Like, I think that's the right livelihood thing, right? Like, so here's part of what I recognize after in my studies is like, life is already hard. Mm-hmm. You put a couple humans out in the middle of the wilderness. We'll call them Adam and Eve, right? And say you got to survive. Mm-hmm. That's not an easy life. That's hard, man. Especially depending on where you are on the planet, you know. But unless you're in a place where it's like 82 degrees year round, you know. So anyway, right effort. So my point in that is humans, through their greed, create more suffering for each other, right? Think about the greed of the Eurocentric white supremacy that was underlying the colonialism of the world. This idea that they're better than everybody else, they live in a garden, the rest of the world's a jungle, and they've got to cultivate it, right? And how they treated the people as they did that. Karma's a bitch. And you and I get to suffer some of that karma because the reality of that world that they were in where they thought that they were going to fucking subjugate everybody, the reality of that world is we were always the minority. We've always been the minority. Anyway, right livelihood. I just said it. Right effort. Cultivating wholesome qualities and releasing unwholesome qualities. Easier said than done, especially for us heathens. Right mindfulness. Whole body and mind awareness. So just being aware of your body, of what's going on. And right concentration, meditation or some other dedicated concentrated practice.
What's the saying? Hard men make good times, good times produce weak men, weak men create bad times create hard men.
Yeah. Let's go back to the cycle.
And that's the thing is like, there is this implicit wisdom in the Andrew Tates and the Mike Tysons. There is this sort of, there's this essential Islamic wisdom, and you know what? Life is what it is, and what it is it's a conquest. Are you going to rise to the occasion? Are you going to grab life by the throat? Or are you going to be a slave? There's a wisdom in that. But at the end of the day, like, there's something more to life than just the conquest.
Well, I think that that's one approach to dealing with the suffering in the world.
Yeah, that's one blade on the
And
Swiss
conquest
Army
to
knife.
me has a lot of greed,
Yeah, it's one tool in the belt.
but it's one that's very selfish, and you're going to create a lot of suffering in the process.
Well, and when you're talking about this Western Eurocentrism, kind of seems to me like that masculine top G energy incarnate. It sounds to me like it's that individual fire that just makes the jump to the brush and eventually burns itself out. I think that's the risk. I think that's kind of what the masculine sentiment is burn baby burn. And that's where, there's these subtler feminine aspects to the human condition that are very necessary. And it's like in a world of gender politicization because initially we were spitballing about what we were going to talk about, and you were talking about relationships. Relationships have been on your mind. And it's like, I think this sort of Jackson Pollock multicultural, I don't want to say approach because it hasn't been everybody's approach, but this experiment in pluralization to the nth degree. This experiment of pluralism to the nth degree, this sort of melting pot, this multiculturalism. I think the error in it, at the risk of sounding like the gun-toting right-winger, which doesn't seem like it to me, but point is like I feel like one of the dangers in the multicultural experiment is losing your own identity in the nexus where everybody else is overlapped. That was a really clinical way to put it, but it's like I feel like everybody's kind of lost a sense of identity, and I feel like everybody's kind of lost a sense of, okay, what are my roots? Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Graham Hancock's little Netflix docu-series because he that. I watched probably the majority of it. It is 1%. It is one snowflake on top of an iceberg of all of this historical context and all of this historical theory and all of this hard archaeological and anthropological study, this examination into the past that is deliberately swept under the rug.
Well, and I think that there's a lot of that going on. I think one of the things that we're realizing is how much our governments want to control our thoughts and control our perceptions.
Yeah, and when you go down,
and so especially with the Eurocentric outlook on the world, right? They don't want to promote anything that's going to make it look like they're not the supreme. Like there was something better than that kills their whole modus operandi, right? If I come to the Amazon rainforest and I see that there are these big civilizations, right? How can I say that I'm bringing civilization to civilizations? Yeah, and so they can't acknowledge that. I would man. There's so much I can go down here, but and we're kind of getting to the point where we're going to wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Look, I see you like, man, we're just getting into it. Maybe next time we'll do a 3-hour show. Yeah. But I think the one of the big themes is for me, and this is why I brought up John Leguizamo, because I watched his History of Latin People for Morons. And then I watched Ghetto Clown, and I recommend them both. especially if you are a Latin Hispanic person, in any shade of that is that has experienced this lack of identity in the greater United States of American culture. I'm not going to say American culture because Latin America are Americans as well, but in this Eurocentric version of American culture, and how sometimes the natives, because if we think about a lot of those Latin people, and John mentions this, they're Native Americans, yo. All these people coming across our borders are fucking Native Americans, bro. Anyway, point for another day. But the for me, understanding that he suffered through depression, even with all his film acting, his ability to use his gifts and make money off of it, and to take care of himself. It helps me in my own depression. For one, it says I'm not alone. And it also says, for all these people that want to tell me that all I've got to do is this and all I got to do is that. No, my depression is real, and I have to accept it as part of my suffering, right? Just as much as a person that's born without a foot has to accept that, right? I got a gentleman, one of my good buddies, Ray, an older gentleman that comes to swim. And one of his legs is just like, for some reason, shorter than the other. My dude's like 80 years old. You know what I mean? He's got a good heart. He's a good guy. He had to accept that, right? Like, what's his other choice? Sit around boo-hoo? He's drunk. Be drugged up, And he probably did some of that at some point. I mean, because I'd say that was pretty hard. But my point is that for me, accepting it's just part of my life. And that's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to have an episode where all I want to do is sleep and smoke weed and masturbate, and I don't get anything done, and I can't get anything done. I can't focus. Like, I have to accept me. I can listen to all the people that say I shouldn't be me, and that's not how I should be. But the truth is, I have to accept me, because that is a part of my way of dealing with my suffering, right? Because honestly, what is my suffering? I mean, I have a lot to be grateful for. Do you recognize that I get to watch one of the most prolific people in history in real time communicating on Twitter? My man is going to go down in history as one of the most prolific people on this planet, bro.
Well, and it even kind of, that Shelley poem even says that it's like there's two responses. I'm suffering right now, and it's hopeless, and I should be afraid of the suffering. Or I can jump with both feet in and assume I'm suffering for a purpose. There's fear and there's hope. And it's like, that's an easy thing to say, but I don't know, my brain's fucking all over the place today. It's just, I don't know, like I've said that before, I've said that a couple times now, how it's like, I feel this big conservative ripple coming down the pipeline. I feel a lot of people right now feel like they're disconnected from their roots. And I feel like a lot of people well, yeah, that is a better topic for another time, but it's like, dude.
Well, that is a topic for another time, and I can't disagree, and I have thoughts. And one of the reasons why we started recording these is because Dylan and I enjoy having conversations about topics such as these.
Yeah, we'd be talking about this shit
and
regardless of
we were having these conversations without the camera, and so we thought we'd put a camera on.
Yeah.
And
I don't know. It's just kind of a very somber Christmas season this year. But it's like, again, like yeah, for me maybe, but it's like, I don't know. Should I be afraid of the somberness, or should I look at it as, okay, well, what's next year gonna hold?
Well, there is another approach to the suffering, and that is hope.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, like literally, that's part of the Christian suffering, right? That's part of the Christian idea of how do I deal with suffering? It's hope. You know, hope. Hope that God will hear me. Hope that God will fix it. Hope that God will do something about it. Hope that God will give some grace and reprieve, right?
It's
And
kind
hope that
of
it's all worth it. Hope that all this suffering is worth it for a reward in another life, right? That's
Well,
the Christian approach to suffering in many ways.
and maybe one source of why it's like this Christmas season kind of has my brain feeling all scatter plotted is, I don't know, like my dad has this tagline of like, he has this through line of like all of our seasonal holidays, they're all rooted in pagan traditions, and it's like there's nothing Christian about Easter, and there's nothing Christian about Christmas, and there's nothing Christian about Halloween whatsoever. And it's like, yeah,
Is he wrong?
he's not. He's really not. But it's like, I don't know. My dad and I kind of, we kind of enjoy bumping heads a little bit over this sort of this diversity of opinion, where he kind of looks at it like, well, maybe we'd be better off just like cutting this stuff out of our lives. It's all just kind of this weird self-indulgence ritual anyways. And I kind of tend to look at it like, well, you kind of need the indulgence. Like, you kind of need those periods in the year where it's like, yeah, you know what? Like, what else was I working the whole year for, if not to just enjoy this moment as much as I can?
You know, a lot of times the reason why they're related to the pagan rituals and the reason why the pagans have those things at those times is because it represents something in the cycle of life, as we talk about the cycles, right? And one of the things about December the 25th, and maybe it's changed because I'm aware that the winter solstice is on the 21st for me in this time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's changed over time or what. But the idea of a resurrection when the sun starts coming out and gets longer again, I totally feel that appreciation. As a person who suffers from depression, the lack of sunlight, the lack of vitamin D, the lack of social interaction, winter, and my natural inclination to hibernate is a depression, can be classified as a depression. And so I have to fight off depression every winter. Now you might say, Chet, why don't you move to San Diego where it's sunny and beautiful all the time? Or Bahia, Brazil, or Hawaii. Well, because I can't take all my people with me. Because this is my home, yeah? And I'm attached to my people more than I'm attached to living somewhere in Hawaii by myself and making new people, yeah? But, because I could do that. But, no, I got myself distracted. Oh, so one of my other ideas that I didn't mention before we started talking about this was to talk, like last night as I was thinking about what we might talk about today, was that I have recognized in my week or two on Twitter now that the same reason why I left Facebook is because it's really emotionally charging and emotionally engaging, right? And I want to confront these people who say this shit. I'm like, oh, that's stupid. And I'm like, wow, I get to call out Mark Cuban and I get to call out famous people and tell them that they're stupid or I disagree, right? Yeah. Not that I've necessarily done that, but I have done some of it, right?
Before you know it, you're attached.
You're definitely attached. Like, and it's cool, right? Like, again, like, Elon Musk is going to be one of the shapers of, like, the future, bro. Like, whether we like it or not, the man is a historical figure that we get to witness in this time, and he's interacting with us. Like, he's never interacted with me personally, but, you know, I see him interacting with the community. I see him interacting with people in ways that I've never seen a leader of humanity interact with people. And I just think it's amazing and outstanding, and that I get to witness it and be a part of it is historical to me. So anyway, oh my gosh, too many tangents.
Yeah.
But how to deal with that stress, right? And one of the ways that, so I think a topic for another day if you can help me remember this, is, how do we use exercise to deal with that stress? Because I know that's something that you and I both do, right? I have found swimming. It helps me tremendously with my depression, helps me tremendously with my mental well-being. It is self-care for me to exercise, and my favorite form of exercise is swimming. And I know that you have also utilized exercise to deal with major stress.
Yeah.
And so maybe we'll have that a topic for another day is how do we cope, right? How do we cope with this life that is hard? Yeah. So, hey, everybody, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you watched all the way through, I love you too. I appreciate you very much. And again, for Christmas, we just ask for likes, shares, subscribes, algorithm love. Shout outs to John Leguizamo, Mike Tyson, and Elon Musk for this week. And thanks for being you. Have a good week.